Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Bava Metzia Daf Nun Vav. We're going to get started with a quick review of what we did last class. Now, we started with the Mishnah, and I'm particularly reviewing this, and I want you to pay attention to the names because at the end of this section, before we get to the next Mishnah, Abaye is going to have comments on all the people who had comments on this sugya. So let's try to review. We started with a Mishnah that said there are 5 cases with Chomesh. We're really interested in the Gemara, and this is the only thing that's going to interest them, is this one case of Trumat Maaser of Demai. Because the issue is, why do you add this extra Chomesh payment when it's only rabbinic? And that was Rabbi Elazar's question. That was quoted by Rava, but Rava doesn't interest us really. It's that Rava says Rabbi Elazar had a problem with this. And he quotes Rabbi Elazar and says, how could the rabbis, do they treat rabbinic law like Torah law? We know there's rabbinic law, there's Torah law. We're always more lenient when it comes to rabbinic law. To which we answered, who answered? Pay attention. Shmuel answered. And Shmuel said, we can explain our Mishnah's Rabbi Meir, who actually thinks that, yes, the rabbis strengthen their law to be like Torah. And in fact, this is something that we've seen. We've actually seen it in other ways as well, which is sometimes the rabbis strengthen their words even more than Torah law because they want people to know that don't think, oh, this is rabbinic law, we don't have to take it seriously, but they actually strengthen rabbinic law more than Torah law, and they treat it more strictly. But in this case, what we're going to say is the rabbis treated rabbinic law like Torah law. And how does Shmuel prove it? And Shmuel, pay attention. Shmuel proves it from get. He says, look, the rabbis instituted that you have to say b'fan nechtam. If you don't, and the woman gets married based on that, she has to get divorced from her new husband, and her child is a mamzer. That is it's treating things very strictly. So that's what we had now. Rabbi Elazar asked the question about the Mishnah. We answered the Mishnah's Rabbi Meir and proved it with get. So Rabbi Elazar asked the question. Shmuel answered. Now Rav Shesha comes and says, but wait, is it really true that Rabbi Meir is strict? We're going to take 2 Mishnayot, one in Demai, one in Maaser Sheni. We're going to compare. And we're going to see that the law for Demai is actually more lenient than the law for Maaser Sheni. And if what we said is true, that Rabbi Meir basically treated rabbinic law just like Torah law, and particularly even in Demai, which is what our topic was, then why in this case does Rabbi Meir not treat Demai like Maaser Sheni? And basically says we're going to be lenient when it comes to the Demai as opposed to the Torah law of Maaser Sheni. And what's the topic? The topic is redeeming Demai and redeeming Maaser Sheni, fruits. Again, what is Demai? We're not sure it came from an Am Haaretz. We don't trust them. We don't think that they take the Masra, so we're going to take Maaser on their produce. So I buy produce from an Am Haaretz. I'm going to now take Maaser, treat it as if Maaser Sheni wasn't taken. What am I going to do according to the Mishnah? So I can redeem the fruits onto a coin, right? Onto money, onto silver, and from there to silver also. To copper. I can do fruits to copper to copper. I can do fruits to silver to copper. I can do fruits to copper to payro, to fruits again. And then there was this machlokah Rabbi Meir Chachamim we're not going to get into about what you do if you end up with fruits again. That's not an issue for us right now. And what do you see there? And it's Rabbi Meir who says it. And basically that's being lenient. Because how do we know it's being lenient? Because the Mishnah Maaser Sheni says, and this is where we ended, if you had 2 coins, one was Maaser Sheni, one was Chulin, and they got mixed up together and you don't know which is which. So how do you resolve that? You don't want both to be Maaser Sheni and have to bring them both to Jerusalem and spend the money there. So you move it from the silver coins to, you bring prutot, little copper coins. You move it onto the copper coins. And then, right, you say wherever the Maaser is, whichever one of these 2 coins, it's now going to move it on to the little coins. Then you basically move it back onto the silver coin. You then take which of the 2 is nicer and you say, well, now it's going to go on that one. So you move it from fruits, it went originally to the silver coin. From the silver coin that got mixed up in the other, it went to the copper coins. From the copper coins, it goes back to silver coins. So you've now moved from, right? Now this sounds like you could do this kind of thing, but the Mishnah says, Mipnei she'amru, because they say, Mechalalin, we're now starting at the top of our daf, Kesef al nechoshet midochak. You can only do the silver to the copper if you're stuck. And that's why, and that's the whole question is, why do we have to then go back to silver? Well, we don't want it to stay in these copper coins because that's really not the way you're supposed to do it. It's supposed to be in the silver coin. So we're going to basically have you go from silver to copper and then back to silver. We're going to move it back onto the silver coins. Now, the main point of this Mishnah that we're going to quote here, that's a problem for our purposes, which sounds like midochak in, shalom midochak lo. If you're not stuck, like we were in this case, because the two coins got mixed up, you're not allowed to do this. So how does he allow it in Demai, but say when it's not Demai and it's Torah law, then you can't do this? So now we're stuck, because looks like Rabbi Meir is not as strict with Demai as he is with Torah law. And that ruins our theory. Well, Rabbi Yosef has an answer. So again, let's just keep reviewing. Rabbi Elazar had the question: how does our Mishnah be strict with Demai when it's only rabbinic? Answer of Shmuel: because he treats it by Torah law, right? He treats it as if it's Torah law. The rabbis were strict with their words as if they're Torah law. Proof: get. Then question from Demai Maser Sheni of Rav Sheshet. Answer of Rav Yosef. Let's go with his answer. Afa pisha mekel Rabbi Meir bepidyono machmiru ba'achilato. We're going to distinguish between Demai in our Mishnah and Demai in the Mishnah that we just quoted. Demai in our Mishnah is a case where we're worried that someone's eating. We had truma that was taken from Maaser of Demai. In other words, we weren't sure if we had to take Maaser or not. We took Maaser. We took truma from there, and now a non-Kohen eats it. That's eating potential Maaser Sheni food. It might be, might not be, right? By rabbinic law it is, but not by Torah law. Then we're comparing that to a case of what we can redeem Maaser Sheni money onto. Maaser Sheni we're strict with. We're not strict with Demai. You can redeem it onto Kesef, from there to Kesef, or from there to Nechoshet, or all that, which you can't do with the real Deoraita stuff. So we're basically going to say, oh, Rabbi Meir was lenient when it came to the redeeming of it, but not when it comes to the food and eating it. Now, how do we know that you could just throw this out as an answer? Well, Rav Yosef brings a proof where we're going to see that actually Rabbi Meir was strict about eating potential rabbinic Maaser Sheni, right, or Demai, or eating Demai. So let's see what we're talking about here. And here, the issue is going to be, we're going to be strict to make sure that you take your tithes properly and you don't eat produce that wasn't tithed, or you don't cause others to eat produce that wasn't tithed. And that's why it's going to be not relating to pidyon and the redeeming of it, which we're going to be maybe Rabbi Meir is lenient about, but when it comes to produce that is untithed, we're worried, maybe, we don't know, it's Ha'aretz, and maybe they took, maybe they didn't. We're going to see that Rabbi Meir is strict. How do we see that? Did Tanya? Lo itiru limkor demai ela lisiton bilvad. Ubalabayit ben kach uben kach tzarich la'aser divrei Rabbi Meir. Here Rabbi Meir is going to be strict about demai. What does he say? If I bought produce from an Ha'aretz and now I'm selling it to somebody, so I can either sell it to a siton, who's like a middle person. Okay, they work and they're almost like a wholesaler, and they sell to store owners. Now, if I bought produce that I don't know if Truma or Masra were taken, do I have an obligation to take Masra before I sell it? No, I am a chaver. I'm a reliable person. People know that I, in general, take Truma or Masra. So we assume that when I sell them something, they have no idea if it came from me or came from something I bought. So they probably assume it came from my field, which means that they assume that I took the tithes out of the produce. So when they buy it, they're going to make assumptions about this that might not be true. So do I have an obligation to tithe my produce before I sell it, because I don't mess people up? Well, they say here, it's in the negative, but it's lo hitiru limkor demai ela lisiton bilvad. The only one I could sell it to is a wholesaler, because this wholesaler is going to sell it to a bunch of other people. And, he sells all this stuff to storekeepers. Now, he gets produce from all different places. So every storekeeper who buys from him knows that his produce is not necessarily tithed, because it might have stuff from Ha'aretz, might not. They don't know when they buy from the Siton whether they're buying stuff from me or whether they're buying stuff that came from an Ha'aretz. So therefore, I don't need to tithe it, because it's going to go through the Siton to the people. They're going to anyway tithe the produce. We don't need to do the double tithing. So that we can do. But Balabayit, if I'm selling to the storekeepers myself, ben kach uben kach tzarich la'aser. Ben kach uben kach is whether I plan to sell a huge amount to store owners, like a wholesaler, or whether I'm going to sell to individuals. Either which way, I have to tithe my produce. Because when they get it from me, the storekeeper, if I go straight to the storekeeper is going to know, oh, well, that's from Michelle. I know that she takes the Masra, so I don't have to worry. So what do you see here? Rabbi Meir says the important part is the last part, and we're going to see the rabbis are lenient about this. But Rabbi Meir says, no, if I sell produce, since the assumption is if I'm selling it directly to the storekeeper, they're going to think that it came from my own field and that I already tithe the produce, I must tithe it before I give it to them. That's astringency. And that's already proving our point. חכמים אומרים, אחד הסיטון ואחד בעל הבית מוכר ושולח לחברו ונותן לו במתנה ואינו חושש. The rabbis disagree and say whether I'm giving it to a siton, whether I'm giving it straight to a Baal Habayit, a homeowner, or whatever it might be. I don't have to worry. I can give it as a gift. I can sell it. I don't have to worry. It's not my problem. Okay, I guess the concern is that they might assume, right? The rabbis think they might assume that I got it from, they don't know that it's mine, so they're anyway going to tithe it. Mativ Ravina. So now Ravina says, just one second. Okay. So now, right. So let's cut a little, right. So they say here, Rashi explains, there's a chazaka that anyone who sells b'midah gasa in a big amount, it depends on the amount, but we're talking about in a big amount, people assume that it's demai and that it wasn't meiser. So now Mativ Ravina. Ravina comes, so okay, let's just go through again. I know I'm going to repeat, but it's good to repeat because we're going to remember when we get to the end, we'll have it hopefully down pat. It's a little confusing to remember all this. Rabbi Elazar, I feel like I'm one of those games where you go back and you remember everything from the beginning, A, B, C, D, what I'm bringing when I go on a trip, right? That game I used to play as a kid. I don't know if you did, but okay. Rabbi Elazar questions the Trumat Maaser. What do you mean? Why are we so strict on rabbinic law? To which we say, Shmuel answered, it's Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir is strict on rabbinic law and proof get. Okay. Then we move to Rav Sheshet's question about Demai. We're lenient with Demai. Rav Yosef answers, we distinguish between Pidyon Demai. There, Rabbi Meir was lenient. But when it comes to eating Demai, we're going to be strict. And here we just proved Rabbi Meir is stricter than the rabbis about eating Demai, and basically meaning you can't give produce to someone that wasn't tithed without tithing it yourself when there's a concern that they might think that you haven't tithed the produce. I'm sorry, they might have assumed that you did tithe the produce. Now we're going to end with a question of Ravina, and we're going to leave this question open, at least for now. Comes Ravina and he says, Mativ Ravina, how could you say that Rabbi Meir is strict when it comes to eating demai? Look, he's lenient, and here we're going to see. Halokach min anachtom. In order to understand this, you need to know some basic issues of maaser. When you take the maaser, what do? You let's say I take lemons off my tree. I separate one lemon for, let's say, X amount of lemons, and I separate that for my truma to maslo. Now, I can only do that under certain conditions. First of all, there's a bunch of rules. The fruit's supposed to be in front of you, even though we've seen some cases where it's not. Then I can only take from good on good. I can't take bad on good. I can't take a bad lemon and say, oh, I'm going to give this to the Levi and, or the Kohen and leave the better stuff for myself. You're not allowed to do that. However, we're going to learn that if you did do it, it's actually effective. That's the first thing you need to know. The second thing you need to know is if I have produce that I already took Truma to Maslon on, so I have my lemons I brought in yesterday, I already separated I tied the produce. And now the next day I come in and I bring another batch of lemons and I take one of the lemons I already tithed and I use that to give to the Levi and leave this, right? And the new stuff is now, I want to fix that stuff by taking one of the ones from yesterday that was already tithed. I can't do that. That's called mina patur ala chiyuv, ala chayav. I take from something that's already exempt, because I already took maaser from it, and I separate from that on something that's actually obligated. Or the reverse. I took from something that wasn't yet tithed, and I said, oh, I'm going to give that to the Levi on account of fruits that I already had that were tithed. So you can't mix chayav and patur. So now that's going to be the important part for our purposes. But in any case, we're going to learn something else on the way. Halokach min anachtom. This is a Mishnah in Demai in the 5th chapter. We're going to learn this Mishnah, and then later we'll get to the next Mishnah. If you buy from a baker, ma'aser min hachama latzonenet. So if I buy and he's an ama aretz, so now I want to take maaser on the bread. So what do? I separate one of the loaves on behalf of all the other loaves. So I could take from hot ones on cold ones, meaning I have a pile of ones that were made yesterday and they're already cooled down, and I have one fresh one from today. I could take the fresh, nice one and use it to fix, the less good ones, okay? Or I can also be ma'aser min hatzonenen ala chama. I could take one of the ones that were sitting around for a long time since yesterday, right? They're not moldy yet, but they're not as good as the fresh ones. We all know how fresh things come out of the bakery, right? It's really good. I could take some of the ones from yesterday, tithe that on behalf of the better ones that came out today. even though you're really not supposed to do that. Okay, we'll see why that's okay. And afilu mitfusim harbe. If there's different shaped loaves, I can take from one shaped loaf on the other shaped loaf. Okay, that seems weird. Why would you think it's a problem? Well, we'll see what the issue is in a bit. And that's really the key for our purposes, Divrei Rabbi Meir. So let's just go through. The Gemara is going to go through the cases. Bishlama minatzonenet ala chama. So, okay. Chama latzonenet, we don't even need to explain. That's like taking your best lemons on your bad lemons. For sure, you can take your best lemons and give it to the Kohen and the Levi. But, so nenet min chama, why would that work? You're not supposed to do min ha'ra'a la tova. You're not supposed to take the bad produce on the good produce. Well, Kid Rabbi Eli. Rabbi Eli says, it goes like Rabbi Eli, this Mishnah. How do we know that this actually is effective now? You're not allowed to do it, but if you do it, it works. That means you fixed your pile, okay? Your pile of good stuff that you now took the bad one to give to the Levi or the Kohen, it actually worked. That is called truma. It's called maaser, what you took, the bad one. And the good stuff is now you can eat, even though you shouldn't have done it, but it is effective. How do we know? Shenema, in the pasuk talks about truma, it says, Lo tisu alav chet b'harimchem et chabo mimenu. Don't create a situation where you sin when you take the truma from it. And then the continuation is v'et kodshei b'nei Yisrael lo techalalu v'lo tamutu, because then you will desecrate the truma, and you shouldn't die by desecrating truma. So now they say the following: Imeno kodesh nisiat chet lama. Now, if by doing the wrong thing, taking the bad on the good, it doesn't become truma, well, then you didn't desecrate anything. In order for something to be desecrated, it has to be sanctified. How does it get sanctified if it never turned into truma in the first place? A little bit of a twisted argument. But what they say is, if we're calling this kodesh and you did something wrong, it must be that when you did it wrong, it actually was effective. And they assume what this means is you took the bad on the good, and yet we still call it kodesh, which means that it works. Okay, that was an aside point because that's not our purpose. Mikan, so they just finished that line. Mikan l'torem and ara'ala yafasha trumatot truma. That's how we learn that halacha. But that we understand. Ela afilu mitfusim harbe. But the other part in the Mishnah we don't understand. If it came from different types of loaves, now the assumption here is that a baker who is he's really the guy who sells baked goods. The guy who sells baked goods probably gets it from different people. And why does he have different shaped loaves? Because different people sold him different shaped loaves. Now, if that's the case, it's very likely this guy who's an Amma Aretz could have bought from Chaverim, could have bought from a Mea Aretz. So if I take from one loaf on another, what if one loaf came from a Chaver and one came from an Amma Aretz? Now, he doesn't label which one came from where. And it could be that one already we took Trumot, they took Trumot Masra from, one they didn't. So now if I take from one loaf on the other loaves, it could be I'm taking from something that was already exempt from Truma and trying to take from there on the other loaves, exempt from Maser. So this would be a problem. And what do we see here? Rabbi Meir is lenient. So Ravina says, look here, Rabbi Meir is lenient when it comes to eating, because he basically says you fixed your produce and it's not a problem, even though there's theoretically an issue here. Okay, end of section. Okay, but not yet. Now we're going to finally get to Abaye, and this is why I kept repeating everything throughout. Amar Abaye, and now Abaye is basically going to do thumbs up, thumbs down. He's going to basically have a comment. He's like a commentator. I'm going to tell you what I think about all these questions, answers that we had in our sugya. Start with Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar, who questioned and said, how could you say Truma Maaser is of Deman? You have to take Chomesh. Isn't it Torah law? Rabbinic law, and you're treating it like Torah law? Rabbi Elazar, Shapir Kakashi. Great question, Rabbi Elazar. Shmuel, lo Shapir Kamashanele. Shmuel's answer, thumbs down. I don't like Shmuel's answer. Why? Well, I'll tell you why. Remember Shmuel's answer? He said it's Rabbi Meir and proves it from the get case. Well, get and truma are two different kinds of cases, and you can't learn from get to trum. Just because Rabbi Meir was strict about get doesn't mean he'd be strict about truma. Why is that? What's the difference? Well, Tekashele Rabbi Elazar mitabi de shamayim. He asked a question about truma, a zar eating truma maaser from Deman. Right now, what's the punishment for someone who eats truma when they're not allowed to, if they're a non-kohen? The punishment is death by the hands of God. Umeshane le Shmuel mita beitin. And Shmuel brought a case where it's death by the hands of the court. What's that? If a woman gets a get and the get's no good, and she goes and marries someone else. She's a married woman, and now if she's with some other man, she'll get the death penalty by the court. So basically, you're comparing two things where death penalty by the court is more strict than death penalty in the hands of God, because the court will institute the punishment. You'll get killed right away. So if Rabbi Meir was strict when it came to get, when there's a rabbinic concern, it doesn't mean he'll be strict when it comes to a rabbinic concern about something that by Torah law, it's only death by the hands of God. So Dil Mashani Mita Beitin de Chamira. Maybe Mita Beitin is more strict, and that's why by get he'll be strict. It doesn't necessarily mean he'll be strict by us. So therefore, thumbs down to Shmuel's answer. Rav Sheshet, let's go to Rav Sheshet's question. Rav Sheshet questioned the whole thing about Demai and Rabbi Meir being strict from this case that we saw that Rabbi Meir wasn't strict when it came to Demai and the redeeming of the Demai. So Rav Sheshet, lo shapir kamotivle, doesn't like Rav Sheshet either. Thumbs down on Rav Sheshet. His question, not a great question. Why not? Because inu mita, umotiv Rav Sheshet, deka'amra inu mita. Sorry. Because what were we talking about? The Mishnah was all about death by the hands of God. And motive Rav Sheshet lav. But what's the problem in the Pidyon Maaser Sheni? Let's say I redeem my Maaser Sheni in a way that I wasn't allowed to. Now, what happens? So my Maaser Sheni isn't actually redeemed. Let's say I move it to money, and I move money to money. And let's say I'm not allowed to do that. So what I did is not effective. If it's not effective, then the money that I have now, that I think was redeemed already, and is chulin, I'm going to not bring it to Jerusalem and spend it there, which is what I'm supposed to do with it. And I'm going to spend it right now wherever I am. Let's say I'm in Renana, for example. So motive Rav Sheshet, his issue was just a lav. It's a lo taseh. It's much more lenient than a death penalty, even if it's death penalty in the hands of God. But this is just a lo taseh. It's just a negative transgression. You can't eat in your gates the Maaser Sheni. So that's not a question. Obviously, Rav Sheshet, Rav Sheshet, why are you asking for this Mishnah? That's only a negative commandment. On a case where we're going to be stricter when it comes to a death penalty than we are about a general negative commandment. Ooh, lemay demotiv Rav Sheshet. But if you are going to anyway just say Rav Sheshet asked this question anyway, well, Rav Yosef Shapir Kamshanile, thumbs up to Rav Yosef. He had a good answer. In other words, let's say, I don't think Rav Sheshet even asked a question, but let's say you accept his question. Rav Yosef give a good answer. Distinguish between redeeming and eating Maaser Sheni, two different things, and that I accept. But Ella Ravina, but now we're going to have a problem with Ravina. Ravina asked this question, Abaye says, and they didn't give an answer, but I have an obvious answer to his question. And in fact, it's so clear that it's in the next Mishnah. The answer is in the next Mishnah. If you had just read on and Demai, you would have come to the answer. If you're going to question it from a nachtom, the guy in the bakery, I'll prove it to you from a palter. What's a palter? A palter is like a siton. Okay, he's like the guy who sells to other people. Just 1 second, I want to check one thing. Right. So he's basically like the siton. He's the middle person who sells to the storekeepers. So now we're going to say the following. Look at the next Mishnah. Ditnan. Halokech mina patel. If you buy from that middle person, ma'aser min kol tfus utfus. Let's say you're a storekeeper and you're buying from the palter. You have to do ma'aser on each type separately because the palter buys from a lot of different people. And therefore, those breads are going to be from all different owners and you can't ma'aser from one to the other. Divrei Rabbi Meir, that's what Rabbi Meir says. So how can you explain this? How does this different, right? How can you differentiate between the nachtom and the palter? The nachtomi didn't require it, which we thought meant Rabbi Meir was lenient. But look, he's strict when it comes to the palter. So why is that? Well, palter mitrei talte gavre zavin. Now we're going to understand the earlier source differently than we thought. A palter, if the palter sells you 3 different types of loaves, you can assume that that palter bought it from a bunch of different people, and therefore you can't do from one on the other. But the baker, the one who has a bakery, nachtom, nami micha gaver huzavin. You can assume the nachtom bought from one person. Either the nachtom did it themselves or bought all. And also we should be probably talking about the grains. The grains or the loaves all came from the same place, and therefore you can assume that it's all one type, even though they're different types of loaves. And that explains it. And that's the answer to Ravina. Really, you learn from the palter that Rabbi Meir is actually strict about all this stuff, and then that resolves it. Rava Amar Shmuel Amar, Rava disagrees with Abaye about one point. Shmuel shaper kamashanele. Shem mita ba'olam. He says, your first problem you have with Shmuel, I don't really agree with it because you said Shmuel asked a question on death by the hands of the court. And he asked that question he answered the question based on death by the hands of the court, trying to prove about death in the hands of God. And Rava says, death, what's the difference? Court imposed, God imposed death. It doesn't matter. It's death. Those are both in the same category. I don't differentiate, and therefore I don't have a problem with Shmuel's. He doesn't respond to the other one that he had a problem with, which was Rav Shesha's question in the first place, and also why didn't they bring an answer to Ravina? Perhaps he agreed with Abaye about that. So thus ends our first sugya of today. Now we're going to move on to an actually easier part of the daf, which is really going to discuss where are there no laws of ona'ah, okay, for overcharging, or undercharging by a sixth. Where do we see that you can't claim ona'ah? In what kind of cases? These are things where there is no ona'ah. Avadim, shtarot, karkaot, and hekdesha. Slaves, documents, land, and sanctified items. Okay, sanctified items would be, let's say I sanctified an animal, and then I sold it to, let's say, or maybe that's not, let's say, we'll get to a case of that, but let's say I sanctify an object, and then I sell it and give the money to Hekdesh. Let's say I sold it for too much money, right? And then I have to give that money to Hekdesh anyway. I can't just undo the sale or something like that. Okay, so if I have sanctified items, there's no ona'ah. And ein lahem tashlumei kefil v'lo tashlumei arba'a v'chamisha. If something was stolen from Hekdesh, you don't pay the double payment. You don't pay the 4 or 5 payment if it was an animal. This is where you'd have an animal. Like I had an animal that I designated for a sacrifice, and then it got a blemish, and I tried to sell it, and then, there's no 4 or 5 payment for that. Obviously, avadim, shtarot, and karkaot can't have cases with animals. They're specifically not animals. Shomer chinam eno nishba v'nosei sachar eno mashalem. If you have someone watching any one of these 4 things, then and it was stolen, they don't have to take an oath. If you're a shomer chinam, you're working for free. You don't have to take an oath and say this was stolen from me. You just don't have to pay. And a nosei sachar doesn't have to pay if it was stolen. Normally, they would have to pay if it was stolen. But remember, shomer chinam would have to swear in order to get out of paying. The nosei sachar would have to pay anyway. Neither of them have to pay in these cases. The laws don't apply to these type of things. That we actually saw from Drashot, if you remember. Rabbi Shimon Omer. Rabbi Shimon disagrees a little bit and says, I'm going to differentiate when it comes to sanctified items. If I actually have to replace the animal, what's the reason it's not applicable? We'll see, because the Torah says, Lo tonu ish et achiv. You can't do it to your brother, but not to Hekdesh. It doesn't apply, right? Hekdesh, this pasuk isn't relevant. So what if, now the whole thing is that when I sanctify an item, it doesn't belong to me anymore, it belongs to the temple. But if I say, I'm going to bring a sacrifice, harei alai, which means that if the animal gets lost, I actually have to replace the animal. If that's the case, then the obligation's on me. And even if I designate an animal right now, that animal doesn't really belong to the temple. It really belongs to me because I'm responsible for it. If something happens to that animal, I have to bring a different one instead. So that kind of animal, you would have ona'ah because it really belongs to me still. But if I say this animal, behemah zo, I say, is going to be sacrificed, then I say this animal, if something happens to that animal, I'm done. That was my obligation. I don't have to replace it. In that case, the animal really belongs to the temple, in which case there's no laws of ona'ah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Afa mocher sefer Torah behemah or margalit en lam ona'ah. You'll have to wait till Daf Nun Chet, 2 more days, to understand why this is. If you sell a sefer Torah, an animal, or a pearl, there's no laws of ona'ah. Amru lo, they said to Rabbi Yehuda, lo amru elat elu. No, there were exceptions to the rule, a list of exceptions. We said them already. These are not part of the exceptions to the rule. We think there's ona'ah even for those cases. So now the Gemara starts with the classic Menahane Mili. Where do we get this from? To which the Torah, the Braita says, Tanu Rabbanan, v'chi timkeru memkar lamitecha o kano miyad mitecha. If you sell a sale to your friend, or you buy something from a friend, and then I'll just keep reading the pasuk. Al tonu ish et achiv. Do not, fraud your friend, or charge too much money or undercharge. What do we learn from the words o kano miyad amitecha, from your hand of your friend? Davar hanikne miyad liyad. It would have to be something that can be passed from hand to hand. Yatsu karkaot she'ena metaltalin. So from that we exclude land. Got rid of one. Yatsu avadim shukshu lekarkaot. We've seen this before. Slaves, Canaanite slaves, are treated like land. Why is that? Because it says in the pasuk, v'nachaltam otam you pass them on to your sons, lebnechem. And it says, I forget the exact words, but achuzat olam, something, it has the word achuzah, which is like land that gets inherited. So they're passed on inheritance like land. So now we say, I want to see if they quote that pasuk. No, it's not here. No, it's not here. Okay. Anyway, Rashi quotes it, but he doesn't quote the whole pasuk. He just says, because it says achuzah, and that pasuk achuzah is like land, and the slaves are considered like land. So whatever's true for land is true for slaves, which that we've got. With that, we've gotten rid of two. Yatzu shtarot dichtiv kitim karu memkar. You have to sell something that's a sale that can be sold. What does that mean? Shegufo machor v'gufo kanoi. That it itself is sold and it itself is acquired by you, by the other side, which means yatzu shtarot she'en gufan machor ve'en gufan kanoi ve'en omdim ela l'raya shebehen. Shtar has no inherent value. We've seen this many times because a shtar is just symbolic of what it says in the shtar, but the actual document doesn't have inherent value. It's just a piece of paper or a piece of parchment. Mikan amru, and from here they say, this is the Braita, the end of the Braita, hamochir shtarotav lebasam yesh lehem. If you were to sell your shtarot to a person who makes perfumes and you sold it to them to use the piece of paper to wrap the perfumes, the herbs, or whatever it is, then there would be ona'ah because you're selling it for its value. So now the Gemara asks, okay, we're actually not finished with the Braita, but we're going to take a break in the Braita because we're still missing hekdesh. We didn't learn them. So shtar, it doesn't have any inherent value, and therefore there's no ona'ah for it because it doesn't have inherent value. In order for there to be ona'ah of overcharging someone, it has to be something that has value. And that they learn from this extra word mimkar. It doesn't really need to say mimkar. It just could say kitim karu, when you sell. Why does it have to say when you sell something that can be sold? So it comes to add that. To which they say, pshita, isn't it obvious that if you sell the parchment for parchment, then of course there would be ona'ah, because then it's more like metaltalin, regular movable property. Well, fuke midir Rav Kahana, which we actually saw yesterday, the Braita is saying this to disagree with Rav Kahana, who said, Da'amar ein ona'ah leprutot. And this we actually saw, this Braita actually disagrees with the Mishnah. What we inferred from our Mishnah yesterday, it didn't list ona'ah for one of the laws of pruta is for ona'ah, because our Mishnah held there is no ona'ah for prutot. Okay, there is no ona'ah. Pruta is too small. We don't have ona'ah for that amount of money. Kamash malan yesh ona'ah leprutot, and that's why they wanted to tell you that documents do have laws of ona'ah, because we do have ona'ah when it comes to a pruta. Hekdeshot. What about hekdesh? Why do we exclude hekdesh? Amar achiv v'lo hekdesh. Has to be owned by your brother and not by the temple. Now we're going to have a problem with the first drasha. So we're done with the Braita. The Braita said, Yad, we learn things that pass from hand to hand. What? Every time the Torah says Yad, we mean actually your hand? Here, we're going to show you a proof that it doesn't. This is with Sichon. It says that with Sichon and Moab, that he took all the land from his hand. What does from his hand mean? What? He was holding the land in his hand? Of course not. What is miyado, from his hand? It meant from his domain, right? From his sovereignty. So hachanami mirishuto, you could say the same thing here. Maybe it just means you took it from his domain, which means, right? In other words, anything that you're buying from someone from their domain, which could include their land as well. Especially in that case, it was specifically talking about land. So maybe it would include land. So now the Gemara wants to counter it with a counter question. What do you mean? Wait, in every other case in the Torah, when it says yad, we don't think it's really yad. We think it's just your domain. Can't possibly be, because look at these Braita. We're going to quote two Braita that we're familiar with already. This is talking about if you steal something and then we find it in your property. Now it says if we find it in your hand. So now the Braita says, well, yado would imply specifically in your hand. What if we find it somewhere else, like a go chatzerov karpifominayin? What if the stolen item is in your roof, in your courtyard, or in your enclosure? How do we know that you're liable? Talmud lomar, right? You have to pay the kefel. Im himatzei timatzei mikol makom. Because you have the words himatzei timatzei, it includes even if it's in one of these, right, some other area in your property. Tama, and not just physically in your hand. But notice, this is all based on Tama Katav Rachman im himatzei timatzei. It's only because of those words. Halapachi, were it not for that. Havamina. I would have said, the whole assumption of the whole question was yad sounds like specifically physically in your hand. And to Tanya, and also it says, minatam biyada, when it comes to a get, you put it in her hand. And liyada, again, the Braita says, oh, it sounds like only her hand. How do you know you can throw it into her courtyard, into her roof, into her enclosed area that's owned by the woman? Because of the word vinatan, it includes any way you give it to her. Again, it's only because it said vinatan. Halapachi word not for that havamina. I would have thought I would have thought anytime it says yad, it means actually your hand. Ela kol yado mamash. Really, in the end, they conclude just like we saw in our own Braita. Yad really means yad, just like miyad, the yad is only metaltalim, actually move from one hand to the other. And shane hatam, only in that thing about the land, it was different because there's no other way to interpret yad. There we had to explain it means your domain. But if we can explain it as really your yad, then it's meant to be your hand. Okay, now we're going to have a question about ona'ah. By Rabbi Zera, schirut yesh lo ona'ah or ein lo ona'ah? What if you rent? What if I rent you a bike? Okay, movable property, not land. Obviously, rental of land, there's no ona'ah, just like buying land. But if I rent you land, if I rent you a bike, is there ona'ah or not? Mimkar amarachmana avalo schirut. Here are the two sides. Well, it said mimkar. Remember, we said that word is unnecessary. So mimkar, it said, but not schirut, meaning specifically mimkar, a sale, but not rental. Oh, Dilma Loshna, or maybe it doesn't make a difference. So Amra le Abaye, Miktiv Mimkar Olam, Mimkar Stamaktiv. Vahainami Biyome Mechirahi. When it says Mimkar, it doesn't say a final sale, a forever sale. No, it says a sale, which means you could say that a rental agreement is also like a sale for the day. So therefore, the word Mimkar, and here they also, the commentaries say, the word Mimkar is extra to really say that in this particular case, we're going to treat schirut like rental like a sale, in which case there will be ona'ah. But some of the commentaries say, but not in other cases. This is a unique halacha here. We don't generally view a rental contract as if it was a sale. By Rav. Rava now asks a question, and from here, it's really our last big question about ona'ah, but we're going to veer and ask a few other questions about the same kind of case. So chitim uzra'an bekar kamahu. What if I had chitim, wheat that grew? Then I took the seeds and I planted them to grow more. And they didn't yet take root. So, yesh lahem ona'ah or ein lahem ona'ah? Do they have ona'ah or not? What would this mean? So we're going to have to, there's a few things we have to figure out here. The first is to see what the two sides are. Do we view this as kiman deshadia mekade damyan? Is it like we have these wheat kernels in a jug, and a few minutes ago or a day ago they were out and about and they were movable stuff, and now they're just like I put them in a jug. I stuck them in the ground. They're not really attached to the ground yet. So we view them as wheat kernels. V'yesh lahem ona'ah, and then they're just movable property. O dilma batzlino agav ara. Or are they considered, since I already planted them in the ground, they're considered secondary to the ground, and there's no ona'ah for land, so there'd be no ona'ah for this either. Oh, hey, Dami, what exactly is the case? What are we talking about? Let's say I sold it to you, and I told you I planted 6 wheat kernels, and really I only planted 5, so I tricked you by a 6th. Well, that's not ona'ah, because ha'amar Rava, kol davar shebimidah, if I lied to you about what the weight was, or the size, the weight, or the number of items, even at less than a 1/6 of a problem of a differentiation, you can claim that was false. That was a false sale, and you can get it back no matter what. You don't have to wait till it's a 1/6. So that's not ona'ah. That's just the sale will be canceled. I said I planted as many seeds as I could in this space. And it turns out I didn't. I really could have planted more. Now, this is not that I tricked you so much, but I did trick you, but it was more that I kind of made a mistake about how I assessed how much could be planted here. That's already more like a judgment call. And I messed up on the judgment call, and I thought that I could only plant X, and I really could have planted Y. So I thought I could only plant 5, and I really could have planted 6. So then I'm off by a 1/6. Now, that's what we're talking about. So the question is, yesh lahem onah or ein lahem onah? Do we call this onah or not? Kiman deshadi b'kad damian. We're now going back to the two options. Is it like it's just in a kad and then there would be onah because it's a metaltalin, movable? O dilma batzlinu agav ara, or is it canceled to the ground? And then it's like land. And furthermore, nishba'in alehen or ein nishba'in alehen? Do we take an oath for this? Let's say it's a modeh b'miktzah case, okay? I say I could plant 5, you said 6, and then it turns out it was 6, and then I say, well, or you claim, I claim I planted 6, you claim 5. What did I know? I just said that wrong. Let me try to get it straight. Rashi actually says it. Im hoda b'miktzah kigon ta'anu pasakta imi lizra shesh. You say, you told me you were selling me 6. You say to me, shemasarti l'chav zarata chamesh, and you only planted 5. And then I say, zarati chamesh v'mechza, and I said, I planted 5.5. So amoda b'miktzah, would I take an oath on that? Because also an oath you only take on movables and not on land. These are all ramifications for whether we call this land or movable. Again, do we say, Kaman deshadim b'kad yadamian v'nishbein alehem? It's just like it's in a jug, because again, this never took root. So it's just like I moved my chita under the ground, but it's no different than being in a jug. And I would take an oath. Or do we say, no, it's already in the ground, so it's now considered part of the ground, and there would be no oath. Last question. Omer mitiran or ein mitiran? Omer mitiran. Okay, what's the omer? The omer is korban omer that we bring on the day after the first day of Pesach. And, actually, today. How great. Okay, so the omer was brought on the 16th of Nisan. So, I just realized that now. So the omer basically permits you to eat the new wheat, okay? All the new crop, you have to wait till the omer is sacrificed, and then it permits everything that already took root. So now the question is, does the omer permit this or not for eating? So now the Gemara asks again, Echidami, what are you talking about? Ida ishrush tanina, ida lo ishrush tanina. If it took root already, we have a Mishnah about that and tells us what to do. If it didn't take root, we have a Mishnah about that too. As it says, it's not. If it took root before the omer permits it. Ve'im lav, asurin ad shiavo omer haba. And if they didn't take root yet, then you have to wait till the next year. So it should be very obvious. Why are we asking this question? Well, lo tzricha dechazdinu v'zar'inu kodem la'omer. What happened? You already cut it from last year. Now, when you cut it from last year, theoretically, right, you cut wheat from last year's crop. When the omer happens now on today, right, that's the 16th of Nisan, it should then permit you to eat it. But what happened? Then you planted it again. So now, and it didn't take root yet. So now, is it counted as last year's or is it counted as this year's? So, atile omer v'chalef al ilavayu. So now the omer comes and lo ishrish kodem omer, but it didn't take root. So mao, I'm just going to finish up at the top of Nun Zayin. Mao the min katu mecha minai. Can you eat from it and say, look, this was from last year's crop. It was already out of the ground. But you also put it in the ground already and it hadn't yet taken root. So now we go back to our question. Is it like it's just sitting in a kad and it was already permitted from last year, so we're good? Or is it canceled to the ground? And we don't have any answers for these questions. And with that, we finish our daf. So quick review of the daf. We continued our sugya about why are we strict about rabbinic law here, like Torah law in the Trumat Maaser of Demai. We answered, we had the whole back and forth. We said it's Rabbi Meir, proving from get. Then we moved to Rav Sheshet's question about what about these contradictory, where we're actually lenient. Rabbi Meir's lenient in Demai. And then Rav Yosef distinguishes between eating Maaser Sheni and redeeming Maaser Sheni, and then proves it from a Braita. And then Ravina says, but wait, we have a Mishnah where we're actually, Rabbi Meir is lenient with Maaser and with Demai. And that is left as a question. But Abai actually answers that question. Abai also has comments about, whether he agrees or disagrees with some of the questions and answers that were given. Then Rava had one small point that he disagreed with Abai about. And then from there, we move to the 4 things that don't have ona'ah. You also don't take, you don't have kefel, arbav chamisha, you don't have dine shomrim about them. And then we saw this distinction within kodshim, the Rabbi Shimon's opinion and Rabbi Yehuda, who added a few other things that also don't have ona'ah. We saw the source for this in the Torah, where we get those 4 things from, but there's no ona'ah for, again, land, slaves, hekdesh, sanctified items, and documents. And then we had a whole question about the biyad drasha. Is biyad really biyad or just your domain? And then we proved no, really biyad is really biyad in your hand. We proved it from two sources. And then we had two questions at the end. Is there ona'ah for rental? And is there ona'ah for chitim uzra'im that you put into the ground and they hadn't yet taken root? And then we had a whole explanation of what exactly we're talking about. And with that, we got into some other questions about that case relating to other halachot. With that, we finished for today. Madim l'simcha to everybody.